Hey guys, tonight we are going to sit with a disappearance that is almost unbearable in its timing. A case in which a young woman vanished from the bright, busy heart of a beautiful city near one of its most famous landmarks, watched over by cameras and passers-by and even the police, only a few hours before her own mother arrived to save her. Her name was Emma Fillipoff, and she was 26 years old, an artistic and free-spirited young woman, far from her Ontario home. On the night of November 28, 2012, in Victoria, British Columbia, near the grand old Empress Hotel, Emma stepped out of the reach of everyone who was trying to help her, and she has never been seen again. Before we settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you find real value in what we do here. There is no pressure and no guilt. Thank you, truly, for the case suggestions that keep finding their way to us. We are also now on Spotify, so the link is in the description if you would rather listen there while you drift off tonight. Now dim the lights and get comfortable. This is a long one, and Emma's story deserves to be told slowly and carefully, and with a special kind of gentleness, because it touches on the fragile and private matter of a young woman's inner life, and we are going to handle that with great care. We are not going to guess at Emma's state of mind beyond what the record actually shows. We are not going to diagnose her or reduce her to a set of symptoms or turn her private struggles into a spectacle. She was a whole and complicated person, loved deeply by her family, and we will keep her at the center as exactly that, a person, and treat the painful details of that night with the tenderness they demand. Have you ever wondered how someone can slip away in the middle of a crowd in a place full of people and light at the very moment that help was closest and simply vanish into the night? That is the heartbreak at the center of Emma Fillipoff's case. She did not disappear from a lonely road or an empty wilderness. She disappeared from the lively downtown heart of Victoria, near a landmark hotel, on an evening when an acquaintance had called for help, when police had spoken with her, when her mother was hours from reaching her. Help was all around her, and still she slipped through it. And the tragedy of how close the world came to catching her is part of what makes this case so hard to bear. To understand it, we have to begin with who Emma was, and with the loving family she came from. Emma Fillipoff was born in the first days of 1986 and grew up in Perth, Ontario, a small and pretty town in the eastern part of the province, in a close and loving family. She was the daughter of Jim and Shelley Fillipoff, and by every account she was bright, creative, and independent, an artistic young woman with a free spirit and a longing to see more of the world. As she grew into her 20s, she felt the pull that many young people feel, the desire to strike out, to travel, to build a life on her own terms, far from the place she had grown up. And so, in the autumn of 2011, Emma made her way clear across the country to Victoria, British Columbia, a beautiful coastal city on the southern tip of Vancouver Island, about as far from Perth as a person can go and still be in Canada. Victoria is a lovely place, a city of gardens and old architecture and ocean air, wrapped around a picturesque inner harbour, watched over by the grand old Empress Hotel and the stone towers of the provincial legislature. It draws travellers and dreamers and young people looking for a fresh start, and Emma was, in a sense, one of them, a young woman from the other side of the country, come to make a life by the sea. She found work, she found places to stay, She began to build the outline of an independent life in a new city far from home. For a while, she was simply a young woman finding her way, living the somewhat unsettled but hopeful life of a person in her 20s, starting over in a beautiful place. Let's stay a little longer with who Emma was, because she was so much more than the circumstances of her last year. By the accounts of those who loved her, Emma was creative and thoughtful, drawn to art and to beauty, a young woman with a rich inner life and a gentle, searching spirit. She was the kind of person who felt things deeply, who was sensitive to the world in a way that could be a gift and could also be a weight. She had grown up loved in a close family, and she carried that love with her across the country, even as she reached for independence. She was not a troubled stranger or a cautionary tale. She was a whole and specific person, an artist, a daughter, a young woman with dreams and struggles like anyone who happened to be passing through a hard stretch far from home. It matters to hold that fullness in view, because a case like Emma's can so easily flatten a person into a set of symptoms or a string of strange behaviors on a single night. But Emma was a life, not a case file. She had favorite things and particular ways of seeing the world, a laugh her family still remembers, a presence that filled a room in the way that only a real person can. When we talk about the difficult moment she was in, we are talking about a hard chapter in a full life, not the whole of who she was. And when her family searches for her, they are not searching for a mystery to be solved. They are searching for Emma, the specific, irreplaceable young woman they love, and it is her, the person, that we try to keep at the center tonight. The people who knew Emma speak of a young woman with a particular kind of light, artistic and observant, drawn to beauty and to meaning, someone who saw the world with a sensitivity that set her apart. She had the soul of an artist. The family and friends have suggested a person attuned to color and feeling and the deeper currents of things. That sensitivity is a precious quality, and it is also, sometimes, a heavy one to carry, because a person who feels the world deeply feels its hardness deeply too. Emma was that kind of person, gifted and tender at once, and the fragile time she was passing through was, in part, the cost of that same depth of feeling that made her who she was. It is worth resisting, firmly, any temptation to reduce Emma to the difficult chapter she was in when she vanished. A hard stretch is not the whole of a person. Emma had years of ordinary happiness behind her, a childhood in a loving family, friendships, creativity, all the texture of a full young life. The struggle of her last months was real, and we hold it with compassion. But it was a chapter, not the book. The Emma her family knows and searches for is the whole person, the artist and the daughter and the friend, the young woman with the deep eyes and the tender heart, not merely the distressed figure of a single November night. To remember her rightly is to remember all of her, and to refuse to let the manner of her disappearance eclipse the fullness of who she was. That fullness is what makes the loss so large. It is not a case that vanished from the world. It is Emma, a whole and specific and irreplaceable human being, an artist and a daughter, a person who laughed and dreamed and struggled and loved. When we search for her, and when her family searches for her, that is who we are looking for. Not the answer to a puzzle, but the return of a person, or at least the truth of what became of her. And it is for her, the whole person, that we keep telling her story, that we keep her name in the light, that we refuse, along with her family, to let her be forgotten. There is one thing about Emma's situation that would prove tragically important, and it deserves a gentle word. Living an unsettled life, staying at times in a shelter, working seasonal jobs, being far from the family who knew her best, meant that Emma did not have around her, in Victoria, the dense web of people who might have noticed sooner and more surely that something was wrong. A person deeply embedded in a settled life, with family close and a fixed home and a daily routine full of familiar faces, is caught more quickly when they begin to struggle. Emma, far from home and in a transitional situation, had fewer of those threads around her, which is part of why her mother's cross-country instinct mattered so much, and part of why the tragedy could unfold as it did. It is not a failing of Emma's, it is simply a feature of where she was in her life, and it made her more vulnerable to slipping through the cracks. Let's be honest and gentle about the shape of Emma's life in Victoria, because it matters and because it deserves to be described with care. Emma's life in that year was not always easy or settled. She worked seasonally at a well-known spot on the waterfront called the Red Fish Blue Fish, a job that came to an end when the season closed at the end of October 2012. She stayed, at times, at a women's shelter called the Sandy Merriman House, a place that offered support and a bed to women who needed one. She had a van, an older vehicle, stored at a downtown parking lot. Hers was, in other words, a life with some precariousness in it, the kind of unsettled situation that many young people pass through, especially those far from home and finding their footing. None of that diminishes her. It is simply the honest texture of where she was in her life, a young woman in a somewhat fragile and transitional moment, still finding her way. It is important to say, clearly and early, that we are going to be very careful about how we describe Emma's inner life and her state of mind, because this is exactly the kind of case where carelessness does harm. There has been, over the years, a great deal of public speculation about what Emma was thinking and feeling, about her mental and emotional state, about what might have been troubling her. We are not going to join that speculation. What we can say is what the record shows, that her family had grown concerned about her in the weeks before she vanished, and that on the night she disappeared, witnesses described her as distressed. Beyond that documented ground, we will not go, because Emma was a real and private person, because no one can truly know the inner world of another, and because she deserves to be treated with the dignity we would want for anyone we love. You're in Victoria in late November, and the beautiful coastal city has turned toward winter, the days short and grey, the harbour cold under low skies, the lights of the Empress reflecting on the dark water. It is a lovely place even in the cold, but it is also, for a young woman far from home and passing through a fragile time, a place where the loneliness of a new city can press in as the light fails early and the tourist season fades. Somewhere in this city, in these late autumn days, Emma Fillipoff is living her uncertain, hopeful, difficult life, unaware, as we all are, that the ordinary days are running out. And back in Ontario, her mother is growing worried enough to begin thinking about crossing the country to see for herself that her daughter is all right. That mother's concern is one of the most important and most heartbreaking threads of this whole story, so let's sit with it. Shelley Fillipoff, Emma's mother, had been in contact with her daughter, and something in those contacts had begun to alarm her. A mother knows the sound of her child's voice, knows when something is wrong beneath the words, and Shelley had come to feel that Emma was not all right, that she needed help, that the situation across the country was serious enough to act on. This is the instinct that lives in loving parents, the deep radar that picks up trouble in a child even from 3,000 miles away. And Shelley, acting on that instinct, made the decision that any loving parent would make. She would go to Victoria. She would cross the entire country to reach her daughter, to see with her own eyes that Emma was safe, and to bring whatever help was needed. Think about the weight of that decision and the love inside it. Shelley did not dismiss her worry or tell herself she was overreacting. She trusted the instinct that said her daughter needed her, and she acted on it, arranging to travel clear across Canada, from Ontario to the far coast of British Columbia, to be with Emma. She was coming to help. She was coming to catch her daughter before whatever was wrong got worse. And in one of the cruelest coincidences of timing in any case we have ever told, Shelley would arrive in Victoria on the very night that Emma disappeared, only a few hours too late, reaching the place her daughter had been just after Emma had slipped away into the dark. The rescue was already on its way. It simply did not arrive in time. Have you ever wondered what it would be to travel across an entire country to save someone you love, and to arrive only hours after they vanished to reach the very city, the very shelter, and find them already gone? That is what happened to Shelley Fillipoff, and it is almost too painful to contemplate. She did everything right. She heard the alarm. She trusted it. She came. And the timing, by the smallest and cruelest of margins, defeated her. To understand how those margins closed, we have to walk through the last day anyone can account for, the 28th of November, 2012, and the strange, sad, and still unexplained sequence of Emma's final hours. Let's walk through that day with care, because every part of it has been examined and re-examined in the years since. In the early hours of the morning, around 6, Emma spoke with staff at the Chateau Victoria, the hotel where her van was stored in the parking lot. At some point that day, Emma made 2 purchases that would later take on great significance. She bought a prepaid cell phone at a convenience store on Government Street in the downtown core. And she bought a prepaid cash card loaded with $200. These are the kinds of purchases a person makes when they want money and communication that cannot easily be traced or tied to their name. And they have fueled endless speculation about what Emma might have been planning. But we should be careful, because there are many reasons a person might buy such things, and we do not actually know what was in Emma's mind. Later, as the evening came on, Emma did something else that has never been fully explained. She hailed a taxi, and by the account given, she asked to be taken to the Victoria International Airport, which sits some distance outside the city, but she did not complete the trip. She got out of the taxi shortly after getting in, abandoning the ride to the airport before it had really begun. What was she doing? Was she planning to fly somewhere and then changed her mind? Was she frightened or confused or acting on some impulse we cannot reconstruct? We do not know. The aborted taxi ride is one of the many small, strange, unexplained actions of Emma's last evening, a fragment of behavior that hints at a mind in some kind of turmoil or uncertainty, without ever telling us what that turmoil was. When you lay out the whole sequence of that day, it has the quality of a series of fragments that almost form a picture and never quite do. The early conversation at the hotel, the untraceable phone and the cash card, the taxi to the airport begun and abandoned, the barefoot walking in the cold near the Empress. Each of these is a real, documented action, and each seems to point towards something, some intention or state, and yet none of them, alone or together, resolves into a clear explanation. It is like reading the scattered pages of a diary with the connecting passages torn out. You can see the moments, but not the thread that joins them, not the why beneath the what. That is one of the hardest things about Emma's last day. It is not that we know nothing. It is that we know a handful of vivid, disconnected facts, and they refuse to cohere. A person planning to leave might buy an untraceable phone, but might not walk barefoot in the cold. A person in acute distress might walk barefoot in the cold, but the careful purchases suggest some kind of planning. The fragments pull in different directions, supporting different stories, settling on none. And so Emma's last day remains a kind of puzzle with pieces missing, a sequence we can partly reconstruct but cannot fully understand, its inner logic lost with Emma herself. To be fair, we should be humble about how much any of these fragments can really tell us, because a person in distress does not always act in ways that make sense from the outside, and reading intention into scattered actions is a dangerous game. Perhaps there was no single coherent plan at all. Perhaps the day was exactly what it looks like, a series of disconnected impulses from a young woman who was not in an ordinary state. We do not know, and the honest response is to lay out the fragments as they are, to resist the urge to force them into a tidy narrative, and to admit that the thread connecting Emma's last actions is one of the many things about that night that we simply cannot recover. As that November evening deepened, Emma made her way to the area around the Empress Hotel, the grand and famous landmark that anchors the Victoria Harbour front. And here, between about 7:15 and 8 in the evening, she was seen by people who would later become part of the record. Emma was observed walking barefoot on a cold, late November night near the Empress. An acquaintance who knew her, a man named Dennis Key, saw her and was concerned enough by her state to call 911 for help. By his account, Emma appeared to be in severe distress. He did the right thing, the thing you hope a person would do when they see someone who seems to be in trouble. He called for help, hoping that the authorities could reach Emma and make sure she was safe. You're in the winter dark near the Empress Hotel on that cold November evening, and the scene is at once ordinary and quietly alarming. The great old hotel is lit up along the dark harbour, the last of the evening's foot traffic moving through the downtown, the tourist heart of Victoria going about its winter night. And there, among it all, is a young woman walking barefoot in the cold, visibly distressed, moving through the lights and the people in some private difficulty that those around her can see but not understand. It is the kind of moment that pricks the conscience of a passerby, the sense that something is wrong with this person, that she needs help, and someone acted on that sense, and the call went out, and help was summoned into the winter night. For a moment, the safety net that a city is supposed to provide seemed to be closing around Emma. When the call came in, Victoria police officers responded, and here we reach one of the most scrutinized and agonizing episodes in the entire case. The officers made contact with Emma, and they spent a substantial amount of time with her. By the accounts, something on the order of 45 minutes, speaking with her, assessing her, trying to determine whether she was in danger and whether they needed to intervene. This was a real and serious welfare check, not a passing glance. For roughly 3/4 of an hour, trained officers were with Emma, talking to her, evaluating her situation, and at the end of that assessment, they made the determination that they were empowered to make. They concluded that Emma did not pose a threat to herself or to others, and having reached that conclusion, they released her. They let her go on her way into the night. We have to be careful and fair about that police decision, because it is easy, with the terrible knowledge of what came after, to judge it harshly, and that would not be just. The officers who spoke with Emma did not know the future. They faced the situation as it presented itself in that moment. A young woman who was distressed, but who, in their trained assessment, over 45 minutes, did not meet the legal threshold for involuntary intervention. In most places, the law sets a high bar for holding a person against their will, requiring a genuine and immediate danger to self or others, and that bar exists for good reasons, to protect people's liberty and autonomy. The officers judged that Emma did not meet it. To be fair, we can grieve the outcome without condemning the decision, because hindsight makes tragedies look preventable that were not, in the moment, clearly so. The officers made a judgment call within the constraints of the law, and the constraints of the law did not, in that moment, allow them to save her. It is worth understanding the genuine dilemma at the heart of that moment, because it is one that plays out in cities everywhere, every night, and it has no easy answer. On one side is the value of a person's liberty, the deep principle that we do not lock people up or hold them against their will simply because they seem to be struggling, because they are behaving unusually, because they are distressed. That principle protects all of us, and it protects especially the many people who pass through hard times and have every right to do so without being detained. On the other side is the duty to protect the vulnerable, the wish to catch a person before harm comes to them. Between those two values runs a narrow and difficult line, and the law draws it at a high threshold, requiring a clear and immediate danger before a person's freedom can be overridden. The officers who met Emma had to stand on that line and make a judgment in real time, with incomplete information about which side of it she fell on. You're in the shoes of those officers for a moment, on a cold November night, facing a distressed young woman near the Empress, and you can feel how hard the judgment really is. She is upset, unusual, walking barefoot in the cold, and that is worrying. But she is also an adult, speaking with you, not obviously an immediate danger to herself or anyone else in the way the law requires for you to hold her, detain her against her will on the strength of distress alone, and you may be trampling the rights of a person who has committed no crime and poses no clear danger. Let her go, and you may be releasing someone who will come to harm. The officers had to choose in that moment without the knowledge of what would follow, and they chose as the law and their training pointed them. To be fair, it is only the terrible outcome that makes the choice look obvious in hindsight, and hindsight is a cruel and dishonest judge. We linger on this not to assign blame, but because it is one of the real and important lessons of Emma's case, the way our systems can fail a person even when no one does anything wrong. There was no villain in that welfare check. The acquaintance who called for help did the right thing. The officers who responded did their jobs, spent real time with Emma and made a lawful judgment. And still, the outcome was catastrophic. That is one of the hardest truths these cases teach, that a person can be failed not through anyone's malice or negligence, but through the ordinary gaps in imperfect systems, through the narrow thresholds and impossible judgments that leave just enough room for a tragedy to slip through. Emma slipped through exactly such a gap in the hands of the very people trying to help her. And there is a grief in that, with no one to be angry at. Emma's case is a reminder of a larger and often overlooked truth, that a great many people go missing every year, quietly, without the attention that a few famous cases receive. Most of them are found, thankfully, but some are not. And among the never found are a disproportionate number of people who are struggling, who are on the margins, who did not have around them the dense web of family and routine that catches most of us when we fall. A person in a fragile, transitional moment, far from home, is exactly the kind of person who can slip away without the alarm rising quickly enough. That is not a judgment of those people. It is a description of a vulnerability, and it is a call to look out more carefully for those who are passing through hard times, because they are the ones most at risk of disappearing into the gaps. There is a reason that Emma's mother has become an advocate, not only for Emma, but for the missing in general, and it lives in exactly this truth. The gaps that Emma fell through are not unique to her. They run through our communities, through our systems, through the ways we do and do not keep track of one another. Every person who slips away unnoticed is a reminder that the safety net has holes, and that the people most likely to fall through them are often the ones least able to hold on. To be fair, no society can catch everyone, and there is no simple fix. But there is a call in Emma's story to pay more attention, to check on the people who are struggling, to be the thread that keeps someone tethered to the world when their own grip is failing. You're being asked, in a quiet way, by a case like Emma's, to look a little more carefully at the people around you who might be slipping. It is not a dramatic ask. It is the small, ordinary work of noticing, of checking in, of not assuming that someone in distress will be caught by someone else. Emma was seen that night, and people noticed, and someone even called for help. And still she slipped through, which tells us that noticing is necessary, but not always sufficient, and that the work of holding on to the vulnerable is harder and more important than we often admit. If Emma's story leaves us with anything beyond grief, it is that gentle, urgent call to look out for one another a little more carefully, so that fewer people vanish into the gaps the way she did. Have you ever wondered how a person can be right there, in the hands of the very system meant to protect them, spoken to by the police themselves, and still slip through, because the law's threshold for intervention is high, and the signs of danger are not always clear enough to cross it? Emma's case is one of the most painful illustrations of that gap. She was not ignored. She was not invisible. The police spent 45 minutes with her, and still, within the rules they were bound by, they could not hold her, and so they let her go, and she walked away from the Empress and out of the recorded world. The safety net had closed around her, and then it opened again, and she slipped through into the night and was gone. After the police released her, Emma walked away from the Empress area, and that was the last time anyone can reliably say they saw her. Somewhere after roughly 8 in the evening, in the downtown heart of Victoria, Emma Fillipoff stepped out of the record of the world, and here the cruel timing closes its trap. Because at about 11 that same night, only about 3 hours after Emma was last seen, Her mother, Shelley, arrived in Victoria and made her way to the Sandy Merriman house, the shelter where Emma had been staying. Shelley had crossed the entire country to reach her daughter, and she arrived that very night, and Emma was already gone. By midnight, Emma Fillipoff was officially classified as a missing person. The rescue had arrived, and there was no one left to rescue. You're in that shelter late on the night of November 28th, watching a mother arrive at the end of a desperate cross-country journey, only to learn that her daughter cannot be found. Shelley has traveled for hours and thousands of miles, carrying a mother's fear, hoping to wrap her arms around Emma and make her safe. And she arrives to a nightmare instead, to the news that Emma was here, was nearby just hours ago, was spoken to by police this very evening, and is now simply gone, vanished into the winter dark of a city 3,000 miles from home. It is impossible to imagine the horror of that arrival, the collapse of the hope that had carried Shelley across the country, the beginning of a search that would consume the rest of her life. Which is to say that the very night meant to be a rescue became, instead, the first night of an endless nightmare. Sit for a moment longer with the sheer cruelty of that timing, because it is one of the details that makes Emma's case so uniquely painful. A gap of only about 3 hours separated the last sighting of Emma from her mother's arrival at the shelter. 3 hours. After all those miles, all that fear, all that love that had driven Shelley across an entire country, the margin came down to a handful of hours. If any number of small things had gone differently, if Emma had stayed a little longer, if Shelley's journey had been a little faster, if the police check had ended differently, the two of them might have been reunited that very night, and this might have been a story of a rescue rather than a disappearance. Instead, the margins closed the wrong way, and a mother arrived to an empty space where her daughter had been. There is a particular agony in a near miss like that, in coming so close to a different ending. It is one thing to lose someone when nothing could have been done. It is another to lose them by a margin of hours, to know that rescue was on its way and simply did not arrive in time. Shelley has had to live not only with Emma's disappearance, but with that terrible nearness, the knowledge of how close she came, the 3 hours that separated hope from catastrophe. To be fair, no one could have engineered those hours differently in the moment, and there is no fault in the timing, only tragedy. But the nearness is its own wound, and it is one that Emma's family has carried alongside all the others, the memory of a rescue that came within hours and still, heartbreakingly, too late. From that night, the search for Emma began, and it has never truly ended. In the immediate aftermath, the police and Emma's family did what is done in the first hours of a disappearance, searching the downtown area, canvassing, trying to trace where Emma might have gone after she left the Empress. Shelley, having arrived to catastrophe, did not turn around and go home. She stayed, and she threw herself into the search for her daughter with a devotion that has defined the case ever since. The investigation opened, the missing person report was filed, and the machinery of a search ground into motion around the absence of a young woman who had been, only hours before, within arm's reach of help. But the search kept running into the same walls because Emma's last known movements were so strange and so untraceable. The prepaid phone she had bought that day, the one that might have let investigators track her or reach her, was never activated. It never made a call, never connected to a network in a way that could be followed. Whatever Emma bought it for, it went dark and stayed dark, a dead end instead of a lifeline. The $200 cash card she had purchased was, sometime later, found near a community center in the area. One small physical trace of Emma's passage through the city, recovered but unexplained. These fragments, the dark phone and the abandoned card, are among the few concrete things the search turned up, and neither of them answered the central question of where Emma went. Let's talk carefully about those strange purchases, the prepaid phone and the cash card, because they have been the subject of enormous speculation and they deserve a measured hand. On one reading, buying a prepaid phone and an untraceable cash card looks like preparation, the kind of thing a person might do if they were planning to leave, to disappear deliberately, to start over somewhere without being followed. That interpretation has led some to believe that Emma chose to vanish, that she walked away from her life on purpose and may still be alive somewhere under a new name. On another reading, though, these same purchases could reflect something else entirely, the disordered actions of a person in distress, or a wish for privacy or safety that had nothing to do with a planned disappearance. To be fair, we genuinely do not know which reading is true, and the honest thing is to hold the purchases as what they are, suggestive but ambiguous, capable of supporting more than one story and proving none of them. Have you ever wondered how the same small handful of facts can point toward completely different conclusions? How a prepaid phone can look like an escape plan or a sign of crisis depending entirely on what you already believe happened? Emma's purchases are exactly that kind of fact. To someone convinced she walked away, they are evidence of preparation. To someone convinced she was in crisis, they are evidence of a mind not working in ordinary ways. The truth is that the purchases themselves are silent. They tell us Emma wanted a phone and some money that could not be easily traced. They do not tell us why, and any honest account has to resist the temptation to make them say more than they can, to let them settle the mystery in favor of whichever story we find most compelling. Now we come to the most delicate part of Emma's story, the question of her state of mind, and here we are going to move with the greatest care, because this is where a case like Emma's can so easily do harm. In the weeks before she vanished, and on the night itself, there were signs that Emma was struggling, that something was wrong. Her family had grown concerned enough that her mother crossed the country. An acquaintance who saw her that night described her as being in severe distress. Her behavior that day, the untraceable purchases, the aborted trip to the airport, the barefoot walking in the cold, all of it suggests a person who was not in an ordinary, settled frame of mind. These are the documented facts, and we can state them plainly and with compassion. But we are going to stop exactly there, at the edge of the documented record, and we are not going to cross into diagnosis or speculation about the specific nature of Emma's inner life. It is not our place, and it is not anyone's place, to reach back across the years and assign a label to what Emma was experiencing, to declare that she suffered from this or that specific condition, to turn her private struggle into a tidy clinical story. We never met Emma. We cannot see inside her mind, then or now, and she deserves the same dignity and privacy that any of us would want if we were passing through a hard and fragile time. So we will say only what is true and known, that Emma appeared to be struggling, that she seemed distressed, that her family was worried, and we will leave the rest, the private interior of a real young woman, unopened and respected. To be fair, this restraint can be frustrating because we naturally want to understand, and understanding a person's state of mind feels like it would help explain what happened. But there is a difference between compassionate acknowledgement and invasive speculation, and it is a difference that matters. We can hold, with real tenderness, the fact that Emma was going through something difficult, that she was, on the night she vanished, a young woman in distress, far from home. We do not need to name it, categorize it, or dramatize it to honor it, and we especially must not use it to draw cheap or cruel conclusions to suggest that her struggle makes her disappearance less tragic or less worthy of a full and serious search. Whatever Emma was carrying that night, she was a beloved daughter in trouble, and she deserved then, and deserves now, nothing but care. There is one more reason to be careful here, and it is a matter of respect for people who struggle. Emma is not alone in having passed through a hard and fragile time. A great many people, at some point in their lives, move through periods of real difficulty, of distress, of not being fully themselves. To treat such a period as something shameful, or as a lurid explanation, or as a reason to take a person less seriously, is to do a disservice not only to Emma, but to everyone who has ever struggled. So we hold Emma's difficulty the way we would want our own hardest moments held, with gentleness, without judgment, and without turning a private struggle into a public spectacle. She was a person going through something hard, and she was worthy of rescue. And the fact that she was not rescued is the tragedy, not any failing of her own. There is one figure from that night who has remained a genuine question mark in the case, and we will describe him carefully because he has never been identified and never been accused of anything. In the accounts and the surveillance from around the Empress that evening, investigators took interest in a man seen near Emma, a man who came to be known simply by a detail of his clothing as the man in the green shirt. This individual was near Emma at some point that night, and because he has never been identified, he has remained, in the language of investigations, a person of interest, someone the police would very much like to identify and speak with, if only to understand what he may have seen. We should be precise about what that means. A person of interest is not a suspect and not an accused. The man in the green shirt has never been charged with anything, has never been shown to have done anything wrong, and may well be an entirely innocent passerby who simply happened to be near Emma and who could, if found, help fill in the picture of her last hours. We raise him only because the investigation has, and we frame him exactly as the investigation does, as an unidentified person whom police would like to locate, not as a villain in a story. It would be easy and wrong to let the mysterious, unidentified man become, in our minds, the answer to the case, the shadowy figure onto whom we project all our fear and suspicion. But there is no evidence that he harmed Emma, and the honest truth is that we do not know who he is or what, if anything, he has to do with her disappearance. He's a loose thread, an unidentified witness or bystander, and the appeal to identify him is a real and reasonable part of the investigation. If you were in downtown Victoria that night, or know someone who was, that ordinary knowledge could matter, but we will not turn an unidentified man into an accusation, because that is not what the evidence supports and not how fairness works. Emma's case has drawn a great deal of attention over the years, much of it online, and that attention carries a particular danger that is worth naming, because it touches the very things we have been so careful about. When a case involves a person who was struggling, the internet's appetite for explanation can turn cruel. People speculate freely and often carelessly about what Emma was thinking, what she was suffering, what secret trouble drove her into the night. They assign her conditions and motives she never disclosed. They treat her private inner life as public property, as material for theories and debate. And in doing so, they can strip a real and vulnerable young woman of the dignity that everyone, especially the struggling, deserves. We are not going to take part in that, and we would gently ask everyone who cares about this case not to either. Emma's difficulties, whatever their exact nature, were her own, private and complicated and human. They are not ours to diagnose, dramatize, or dissect for entertainment. To be fair, the impulse behind much of the speculation is not cruelty, but a desire to understand, to make sense of a senseless loss. But the desire to understand does not give us the right to invade the privacy of a struggling person. An understanding built on guesswork is not understanding at all. The kind and the honest thing is to hold what we actually know, that Emma was going through a hard time and was in distress that night, and to leave the rest, the private interior of a real person, respectfully closed. There is a broader point here that reaches beyond Emma. The way we talk about a missing person who was struggling sends a message to everyone who has ever struggled, which is a great many of us. If we treat Emma's difficulties as shameful, or as a lurid explanation, or as a reason to search less hard or care less deeply, we tell every struggling person that their pain makes them less worthy of concern. That is a cruel and false message. Emma's distress did not make her less precious, less loved, or less deserving of rescue. It made her more in need of care, not less. And the way we honor her is to insist on exactly that a person in difficulty is not a lesser person, but a person who needs us more, and whose disappearance is not less tragic, but more. Over the years, the search for Emma has followed more than 200 leads, and the sheer number is a measure of how hard people have looked and how stubbornly the case has resisted an answer. Tips have come in from across the country and beyond. Possible sightings have been reported and checked. At one point, some years into the case, there was a report of a woman resembling Emma seen in Esquimalt, a community near Victoria, a lead that raised hope but did not resolve into a confirmed sighting. Each of these leads has been weighed, and each, in the end, has left the central question unanswered. More than 200 threads pulled, and not one of them has led to Emma. That is the frustrating shape of the case, an enormous investigative effort meeting a silence that will not break. There is a bitter irony at the center of where Emma vanished. She did not disappear from a lonely place. She disappeared from the busy heart of a city. The Empress Hotel is one of the most recognizable landmarks in Victoria. The area around it is full of people, tourists, cameras, and light. It is the kind of place where you would think a person could not simply vanish, and yet Emma did. She slipped away from a crowded, watched, well-lit downtown in the space of an evening and left almost no trace. That is part of what makes the case so unsettling. It happened in plain sight, in the middle of everything, not in some remote and hidden corner of the world. We tend to assume that danger lives in isolated places, in dark roads and empty wilderness, far from help. Emma's case tells a different and harder story. She vanished where help was closest, with people all around her, in a downtown where the police had already spoken with her that very evening. Her mother was only hours away, and still she was gone. The nearness of all that safety did not save her, and there is something deeply disquieting in that. The reminder that a person can be surrounded by help and slip through it all the same. The busy heart of a city is not always the safe place we imagine it to be, especially for someone alone and in distress on a cold night. You're in that lively downtown in your mind, full of light and people and the ordinary bustle of a winter evening, and somewhere in the middle of it, a young woman is quietly slipping out of the world. No one grabs her, no one stops her. The crowd flows on around her, unaware, and she moves through it and past it and out of it, into a silence that all those people and all those cameras somehow could not prevent. That is the eerie truth of Emma's disappearance. It did not happen in the dark at the edge of things. It happened in the light, in the middle of things, where everyone could see and no one could hold on. There is one image from that night that has become the quiet, haunting center of the whole case, and it is worth holding for a moment. It is the image of Emma, barefoot in the cold, near the great lit hotel on the dark harbor, distressed and alone in the middle of a busy evening. It is such a specific and heartbreaking picture. A young woman without her shoes on a November night, moving through the lights of a city that could not save her. That image has stayed with everyone who has followed the case, because it captures so much of the tragedy in a single frame, the vulnerability, the distress, the terrible nearness of help, the way she was so visibly in trouble and still could not be caught. It is the last clear picture the world has of Emma, and it is unbearably poignant. We hold that image with tenderness, not as a spectacle, but as a call. The barefoot young woman near the Empress was somebody's daughter, in real trouble, on a cold night, and she needed to be caught, and she was not. To be fair, remembering her that way is painful, and the family surely carries that image more heavily than anyone. But it is also the image that keeps the case alive, that reminds everyone what is at stake, that puts a real and vulnerable human being at the center of what might otherwise become an abstract mystery. Emma, barefoot in the cold, near the Empress, is the picture that will not let the case be forgotten. And perhaps that is fitting, because it insists every time it is seen that this was a real young woman who needed help and deserved to be found. You're following those 200 leads with the investigators and the family, and it is a landscape of hope raised and hope dashed over and over. A tip comes in, a sighting is reported. For a moment, the possibility flares that this is the one, that Emma will be found alive in some other town, or that a witness will finally explain that night. And then the lead is run down, and it fades, and the searchers are left exactly where they were. To live a case like this is to ride that cycle for years, the rise of hope and the fall of it, never quite able to stop hoping and never able to trust the hope. 200 times and more, that cycle has turned in Emma's case, and still the answer has not come. So let's lay out the possibilities, carefully and without forcing a choice, because the honest truth is that Emma's disappearance could have unfolded in several very different ways, and no one has ever been able to say which. Broadly, there are few. There is the possibility that Emma chose to disappear, that she walked away from her life deliberately and may still be alive. There is the possibility that she was in a state of crisis that led, through some misadventure, to an accidental death. And there is the possibility of foul play, that someone harmed her. Each of these fits some of the facts and strains against others, and each remains genuinely open, which is part of what makes the case so hard to hold. Take the possibility that Emma left on purpose. This is the theory that the prepaid phone and the untraceable cash card seem, at first, to support. The idea that Emma was preparing to slip away and start over somewhere new, free of the difficulties of her life in Victoria. In this version of the story, Emma is alive, living quietly somewhere under a new name, having chosen to vanish. It is, in a way, the most hopeful theory because it means Emma survived, but it also strains against other facts. She left her van behind. She left her family to an agony she loved them too much to want for them. And in all the years since, there's been no confirmed trace of her living anywhere, no verified sighting, no sign of the life she supposedly went off to build. To be fair, it remains possible, and many families cling to exactly this hope, but it is a possibility haunted by everything Emma left behind. Then there is the possibility that Emma, in her distress that night, came to harm through some accident or misadventure. A young woman walking barefoot in the cold, in obvious distress, alone in a coastal city on a dark November night, is a person in real danger from the ordinary hazards of the world, the cold water of the harbour, the traffic, the simple perils that become deadly to someone not fully able to care for herself. It is possible that Emma, in her state, wandered into harm without anyone intending it, and that the sea or the night simply took her. This is a painful possibility, and one that involves no villain at all, only a vulnerable young woman and a cold, indifferent world. To be fair, extensive searching did not find her, which complicates the simplest version of this theory. But the waters around Victoria are deep and do not always give back what they take. The geography of Victoria is worth understanding here, because it shapes the misadventure possibility. Victoria sits at the southern tip of Vancouver Island, wrapped around an inner harbour and open, not far away, to the cold waters of the strait that separates the island from the mainland. It is a city of waterfronts and docks and sea walls, where the ocean is never far from the streets, where a person moving through the downtown at night is often only a short distance from deep, cold water. On a dark November night, for a young woman in distress, barefoot and not fully able to care for herself, that nearness of the water is a real and sobering danger. The cold of the sea in late November can incapacitate a person in minutes, and the currents can carry away what falls into them. None of this is proof of anything, but it is part of the honest landscape of the case. The fact that Emma vanished in a place where the deadly cold water was never far away. We say this gently because it is a painful line of thought, and because it is only one possibility among several. But it is part of why the searches, extensive as they were, could not rule out a tragic accident. The waters around a coastal city are vast and deep, and they do not always yield what they take, and a person who came to harm in them might never be found. To be fair, we have no evidence that this is what happened to Emma, and it remains only one branch of the unknown. But in a case with so few certainties, the honest thing is to acknowledge the whole landscape, including the cold sea that borders the city, where a distressed young woman disappeared into the night. You're in that coastal city on a cold November night, and the sea is a dark presence at the edge of everything. The harbour black and cold under the winter sky, the water lapping at the sea walls just beyond the reach of the streetlights. It is beautiful in the daytime, the harbour and the boats and the mountains beyond, but at night, in late autumn, it is a cold and indifferent immensity pressing against the edge of the bright city. Somewhere in that city, a young woman in distress moved through the dark, and the cold water was never far from wherever she walked. We do not know that the sea took her, but it was there, at the edge of the case, as it is at the edge of the city, a dark possibility in the November night. And then there is the possibility of foul play, that someone crossed Emma's path in her most vulnerable hour and did her harm. A young woman alone, distressed and impaired in judgment, is heartbreakingly vulnerable to a person who might mean her ill. And the unidentified man in the green shirt, whoever he was, is a reminder that we do not know everyone who was near Emma that night. To be fair, there is no evidence that points to a specific person, no proof that a crime occurred at all, and we must not manufacture a culprit out of fear. But the possibility of foul play cannot be ruled out, and it remains one branch of the unknown, held open alongside the others, without accusation and without proof. You're standing in the middle of all these possibilities now, and their multiplicity is itself part of the tragedy. Emma might be alive somewhere, or she might have been taken by the cold water, or she might have met with harm at another's hands. Each possibility asks us to imagine a completely different fate for her, and the case offers no way to choose. That is a peculiar torment for the people who love her, because they cannot even settle into a single grief. They must hold all at once the hope that she is alive and the fear that she is not, the different shapes of a loss that has never taken a final form. And in that unresolved space, with all its competing possibilities, Emma's family has had to build the rest of their lives. Which brings us to the true heart of this story, the love and endurance of Emma's family, and above all, of her mother, Shelley. From that first devastating night, Shelley Fillipoff became the tireless engine of the search for her daughter. She had already shown by crossing the country the depth of her devotion, and after Emma vanished, she poured that devotion into a search that has never stopped. She stayed in Victoria to look for Emma. She worked with investigators, spoke to the media, built and sustained a public campaign to keep Emma's name and face before the world. She created and maintained the means for people to help, gathering tips, keeping the case alive year after year, refusing to let her daughter become just another old file. The devotion of a searching parent is one of the most powerful forces these cases ever reveal, and Shelley's has been extraordinary. She has spoken publicly again and again, through years of anniversaries, about Emma, about the night she vanished, about the enduring hope of finding her. She has done the hard, exhausting work of staying visible, of keeping the appeal alive, of being the voice that will not let the world forget her daughter. Imagine the strength that requires to relive the worst night of your life over and over in public, to keep hoping across more than a decade of silence, to build your life around a search that may never end. Shelley has done exactly that, out of a love that refused and refuses still to give up on Emma. You're in the presence of that kind of love now, the love of a mother who crossed a country to save her daughter, and then, having arrived too late, spent the years that followed searching for her without pause. It is a love that transformed catastrophe into a mission, that took the unbearable and made of it a reason to keep going, to keep speaking Emma's name, to keep the light on for a daughter who might, against all the odds, still be out there. To be fair, no parent should ever have to do what Shelley has done, and the strength of it is measured precisely by how much it has cost. Her endurance is the reason Emma's case is still alive, still investigated, still spoken of, 13 years and more after that terrible November night. Over the years, Shelley's search has grown into something larger than the search for one young woman, though it has never stopped being that. In keeping Emma's case before the public, Shelley has become a voice for the missing more broadly, and for the families who suddenly find themselves living the same nightmare. She has spoken about the gaps that let people slip away, about the difficult questions of how our systems handle those in crisis, about the particular agony of ambiguous loss. She has helped keep attention on the fact that people do vanish, even from busy cities, even when help is close, and that the families left behind need support and answers. In this way, Emma's absence has rippled outward into a kind of advocacy, a determination that what happened to Emma should at least help others, even as the search for Emma herself goes on. The public campaign has taken many forms: the interviews, the anniversaries marked, the appeals renewed, the steady refusal to let Emma's face fade from view. Every year that passes, Shelley and the family find new ways to keep the case alive, to reach new people, to jog the memory of anyone who might hold a piece of the truth. It is exhausting, thankless work, the work of staying public with your deepest grief, of turning your private catastrophe outward again and again in the hope that visibility might bring an answer. And Shelley has done it, year after year, because she understands that an unsolved case survives only on attention, and that the day the world stops looking is the day the last hope of finding Emma quietly dies. You're watching a mother turn the worst thing that ever happened to her into a reason to keep going, and it is one of the most moving things a person can do. Shelley could have retreated into private grief, and no one would have blamed her. Instead, she faced outward, toward the search, toward other families, toward the world, refusing to let Emma be forgotten and refusing to let the pain be wasted. That is not the natural motion of grief, which tends to curl inward around the wound. It is a deliberate, daily act of love and will, sustained across more than a decade. And it is the reason that, all these years later, we are still speaking Emma's name tonight. Have you ever wondered what it would be to carry for over a decade, not knowing whether the person you love most is alive or dead, unable to grieve and unable to fully hope, suspended between the two with no way to choose? That is the condition Shelley and the Fillipoff family have lived in. Psychologists call it ambiguous loss, the loss of a person who is gone, but not confirmed gone. And it is among the hardest kinds of grief a human being can endure, because it denies the mind the terrible mercy of certainty. The family cannot bury Emma because they do not know that she is gone. They cannot celebrate her return because she has not returned. They live in the space between year after year, and it is in that space that they have had to go on living, working, and searching. Living inside that unresolved loss is a strange and exhausting thing. There is no funeral to hold. There is no grave to visit. There is only the open question, renewed every single morning. Most losses, however terrible, eventually give the grieving something solid to stand on, a fact, a date, a place. Ambiguous Loss gives none of that. It asks a family to build a life on a question mark, and the Fillipoff family has done exactly that for more than 13 years, with a strength that is hard to fathom. The days still have to be lived, of course. There are meals to make and bills to pay, and the ordinary business of being alive, all of it carried on beneath the weight of the unanswered question. That is one of the cruelties of a long disappearance. The world does not stop. It asks the family to keep functioning, to go to work, to get through the holidays, to answer the phone, all while a piece of their heart is missing and unaccounted for. They cannot put the grief down because it has no bottom. They cannot pick their lives back up because a central piece is gone. So they carry both at once, the ordinary life and the extraordinary loss, day after day after day. You're inside that suspended life with the family now, and you can feel how it never quite lets go. Every birthday that passes is a birthday Emma is not there for. Every holiday has an empty place. Every ring of the phone might, just might, be the call that ends the not knowing. And so every ring carries a small jolt of hope and dread. The family lives in a state of permanent readiness for news that never comes, a vigilance that cannot be switched off, year after year. It is a form of endurance that most of us are lucky enough never to have to learn, and the Fillipoff family has lived it with grace for over a decade. 13 years and more after Emma vanished, the case remains open and, by the account of the authorities, remains genuinely puzzling. The Victoria Police have continued to describe Emma's disappearance as an active investigation, one that has resisted resolution despite the enormous effort poured into it. It is, in the words that have surrounded the case, a disappearance that continues to puzzle the very investigators who have worked it for over a decade. That candor is itself meaningful. This is not a case the authorities have dismissed or forgotten. It is a case they have worked and still cannot solve, a genuine and enduring mystery that has defeated the best efforts of everyone who has tried to crack it. Every November, as the anniversary of Emma's disappearance comes around, the case returns to the surface of public attention in Victoria and beyond. There are new stories marking the years, 11, then 12, then 13. There are renewed appeals from the family and from the police. There is the painful ritual of remembering, of speaking Emma's name again, of reminding everyone that a young woman vanished from the heart of this city and was never found. It would be easier to let the date pass in silence, and no one would blame a grieving family for wanting that. But the family has never allowed it, understanding that public attention is what keeps an unsolved case alive, that the moment a case falls silent is the moment it is most likely to die. The case has also become part of the memory of Victoria and of Vancouver Island, woven into the sense of the place. People who live there remember Emma, or at least remember the story, the young woman who vanished near the Empress on a cold November night. The Empress itself, that grand and beautiful landmark, carries now, for those who know the story, a quiet shadow, the memory of a young woman last seen in its shadow before she disappeared. A place absorbs its tragedies, and Victoria has absorbed Emma's, holding her in the collective memory of the city as an absence that never resolved, a question the community has carried for over a decade. You're in Victoria on a grey November day years later, and the harbour and the Empress are as beautiful as ever. The tourists still coming, the ordinary life of the city going on. But for those who know, there is a thread of memory running through it, the awareness that here, in this lovely place, a young woman slipped out of the world and was never found. Her story is part of the city now, spoken of on the anniversaries, remembered by those who search, held in the quiet way that a place holds its unsolved sorrows. Emma is woven into Victoria in a way no one would ever have wanted, present in its memory as the young woman who vanished from its bright and busy heart. An open case is a case that can still be answered, and that matters, because it means Emma's story is not necessarily over. If Emma is alive somewhere, she could still be found, or could still choose to come forward. If she came to harm, whether by accident or at another's hands, the truth of it could still surface through a discovery, a confession, a piece of long-held knowledge finally shared. To be fair, 13 years is a long time, and the passage of years makes any case harder, as memories fade and witnesses scatter and trails grow cold. But the case is not closed, and Emma is not forgotten, and the question of what happened to her remains, in principle, answerable. There is a particular kind of hope that lives in Emma's case, one that many disappearance cases do not offer, and it is worth naming with care. Because one of the real possibilities is that Emma chose to leave and may still be alive. Her family holds a hope that is not available to families who know their loved one is gone. Emma could, in principle, still walk through a door, still pick up a phone, still be found living quietly somewhere. That hope is fragile, and the years have worn on it, and no confirmed trace of a living Emma has ever appeared. But it is not impossible, and it is a hope the family has held on to through all the long years, the hope that their daughter is out there, and that one day she might come home. It is worth pausing to consider what an answer would mean for the people who have waited so long, because it is not a simple thing. On one hand, an answer would end the ambiguous grief the family has lived in for over a decade, would replace the endless not knowing with solid ground, however painful that ground might be. Most families in this situation will tell you that they want the truth above all, even a hard truth, because the not knowing is its own unbearable weight. To finally learn what happened to Emma, whatever it is, would be, in its way, a mercy, even if it confirmed the worst. On the other hand, in Emma's case, an answer could also be the best possible news, the discovery that she is alive and safe. That is the double edge of hope. It makes the not knowing more bearable, because the answer might be joy, and also more agonizing, because the answer might be grief. To be fair, after 13 years, the family knows the odds, and they have spoken with painful honesty about the range of what the truth might hold. But they have not given up, and they have not stopped hoping, and their hope is not foolishness. It is a reasonable response to a genuinely open question, to a case where Emma might truly still be out there, which is to say that the hope in Emma's case is real, grounded in the actual possibilities, and it is the fuel that has kept her mother searching for over a decade, and it is worth holding on to, gently, for as long as the question stays open. It is worth asking why Emma's case has resonated so widely and held people's attention for so long, because the answer reaches beyond Emma into something many of us feel. Part of it is the unbearable timing, the mother arriving hours too late, which has a tragic shape that lodges in the mind and will not leave. Part of it is the setting, the disappearance from a bright, busy, watched-down town, which unsettles our assumption that danger lives only in lonely places. And part of it, a large part, is that Emma's story touches the fear that so many of us carry about ourselves or the people we love. The fear of a person in distress slipping through the gaps in a system that was supposed to catch them. Because Emma's case is, among other things, a story about how our society responds or fails to respond to people in crisis. It raises hard questions that have no easy answers about how we care for those who are struggling, about where the line falls between respecting a person's freedom and protecting them from harm, about the narrowness of the moment in which help is possible. Many people who have watched a loved one struggle, or who have struggled themselves, see something of their own fear in Emma's story. The fear of that gap, that moment when the safety net has a hole in it and a person falls through. That is part of why the case has stayed with so many people. It is not only Emma's tragedy, it is a mirror held up to a gap that runs through all our lives. To be fair, there are no villains in that systemic story, and no easy fixes either. The questions Emma's case raises are genuinely hard, and reasonable people disagree about how to balance liberty and safety, about how much power the authorities should have to intervene in the life of a struggling adult. But the case keeps those questions alive, keeps them human and specific, attached to a real young woman and a real family rather than left as abstractions. And in that way, even the systemic dimension of Emma's story is a kind of legacy, a push to think harder about how we catch the people who are falling so that fewer of them slip through the way Emma did, which is to say that the thing this case most needs is the same thing it has always needed: a single person deciding to speak, or a single new fact finally coming to light. Somewhere, it is entirely possible. There is a person who knows something about what happened to Emma Fillipoff after she walked away from the Empress that night, something they have never told. Perhaps it is the unidentified man in the green shirt, or someone who saw Emma later, or someone who has carried a small piece of the truth all this time without realizing its weight. Or perhaps Emma herself is out there, alive, and one day the choice to come home will feel possible. The investigation has done all it can with the evidence it has. What remains is the human knowledge, held somewhere, that could still break the silence. That places a certain responsibility on all of us who take an interest in a case like Emma's, and it is worth naming plainly. Public attention can be a genuine force for good in an unsolved disappearance, keeping it visible, jogging memories, reaching the one person who holds a missing piece. The very fact that Emma's name is still spoken, still searched, still shared, is part of what keeps the case alive and the possibility open. But that same attention carries a responsibility to be kind and to be careful, to keep the interest pointed at finding Emma and away from harming the living, whether that is the unidentified man who may be an innocent bystander, or Emma herself, whose privacy and dignity deserve respect even now. Have you ever wondered whether the cases that stay with us are the ones that most need us to keep watching? The ones where our attention is not idle curiosity, but a kind of long vigil kept on behalf of someone who cannot keep it for themselves. Emma's may be one of those. For over a decade, a great many strangers have kept her story alive alongside her family, and that shared attention, kept respectful and kept kind, is part of what still gives the case a chance. Every time her name is spoken with care, every time the facts are told fairly and gently, the odds tick up, however slightly, that the story will reach the one person who can end it. Remembering Emma, honestly and with compassion, is not a passive act. It is part of the search itself. The healthy version of that attention is easy to describe, even if it is not always easy to practice. Keep Emma's face and name before the world. Share accurate information. Point anyone with real knowledge toward the family's search and the authorities. But refuse to invade her privacy, refuse to accuse the innocent, refuse to turn a struggling young woman's story into a spectacle at the expense of her dignity or her family's peace. That is how a case is kept alive without doing harm, and it is the only way worthy of Emma, who deserves to be searched for with the same tenderness with which she was loved. If you are listening tonight and you know anything at all about what happened to Emma Fillipoff, or if you were in downtown Victoria near the Empress Hotel on the night of November 28th, 2012, and remember anything, please contact the Victoria Police Department or the family's search effort. Even a small detail, a memory that seems insignificant, could be the thread that finally brings Emma home and gives her family the answer they have sought for so many years. Please verify the current tip lines before relying on them, because such details change over time. And if you are Emma and you are out there, please know that your family has never stopped loving you, never stopped looking, and would want nothing more than to know that you are safe. Let's come back, at the end, to Emma herself, because in all the talk of purchases and timelines and possibilities, it is easy to lose the young woman at the center, and she deserves to be remembered as more than the mystery that swallowed her. Emma Fillipoff was 26 years old, a bright, artistic, free-spirited young woman from Perth, Ontario, a daughter dearly loved, a person who had crossed a country to build a life on her own terms in a beautiful place by the sea. She was creative and independent, and, in her last months, going through a hard and fragile time, as so many people do at some point in their lives. She was, on the night she vanished, a young woman in distress and in need of care, and that need does not diminish her. It only makes her loss more painful, and the failure of the world to catch her more heartbreaking. Think about everything that was lost, or at least suspended, when Emma vanished. She was 26, with a whole life still ahead of her. There was the art she might have made, the creative spirit that her family remembers finding its full expression. There were the harder times she might have come through, the way so many people move through a fragile stretch and out the other side into steadier years. There was the person she might have become in her 30s and 40s, the settled, older Emma, who could have looked back on that difficult year as a chapter she survived. All of that possibility hangs now in the balance of the unknown, unlived, or perhaps still being lived somewhere, but lost to the family who love her either way. That is one of the particular sorrows of a case like Emma's, where she may still be alive. The loss is not only the possibility of death, it is the years already gone, the more than a decade of a daughter's life that her family has been unable to share, the birthdays and ordinary days and the simple presence of Emma that have been missing from their lives all this time. Whether Emma is alive or not, those years are gone, stolen from the family by the not knowing. If she is out there, the tragedy is a decade of separation. If she is not, the tragedy is a life cut short in its difficult but hopeful middle. Either way, an enormous amount has been lost, and the losing goes on with every year that the question stays unanswered. To be fair, it is hard to hold all of that and still hope, and yet the family does both. They grieve the years already gone, and they hope for the years that might still be shared if Emma is found. That is the strange doubled state that a case like this imposes, mourning and hoping at once for the same person in the same breath. And through it all, they hold onto the specific young woman at the center, not a symbol or a cause, but Emma herself, the creative, sensitive, beloved daughter whose absence has shaped every day of their lives for more than 13 years. She is who they are searching for. She is who the truth, whenever it comes, will be for. Remember Emma tonight not as a set of strange facts or a puzzle to be solved, but as the whole person she was, loved beyond measure and lost far too soon. Remember, too, her mother, Shelley, who crossed a country to save her, and having arrived too late, has spent every year since searching, and who deserves more than anyone the answer that has never come. And remember the care we owe to everyone who passes through a hard time, the refusal to judge or to label or to reduce a struggling person to a diagnosis, which is not a small thing, but a way of honoring the dignity of a real human life. Emma was a person, complicated and creative and precious, and she matters still. Somewhere, the truth of what happened to Emma Fillipoff still exists, held in the world or in someone's memory, or perhaps carried by Emma herself, waiting for the day it is finally known. Until that day, we keep her name where it belongs, in the light, spoken with care and with love. She was here. She mattered to everyone who knew her, and she matters still. And her mother's long search and the enduring hope of everyone who refuses to let her be forgotten is itself a kind of faith that Emma is not gone from the world's heart, only from its sight. Rest easy, Emma, wherever you are, and may the answer your family has sought for so long finally, at last, come home.